Hello and welcome to Willow Talk. I am Cameron Suey, and with me, as always, is
Chris Baker.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
Doing great, my friend.
All right. And before we jump right into the episode this week, let's do the segment that we always do first before we jump into the episode.
Before we jump into that, you forgot our catchy summary of who we are, which is two old friends who met at LucasArts in the mid-2000s and bonded over Willow. That's just like the quick summation of why people know they should be listening to us. And
yes, that's our little sprinkling of credibility.
Yes. But yeah, you know, as always, I figured we'd start with news, as always.
As we always do.
We always start with news. We just haven't had any because it's Willow. But we actually did have some news this time. And what was the news, Cameron?
Well, the news was the announcement that there is another release of, I believe the company is ReAction, that does these action figures in the style of the 1980s Kenner action figures.
The company is called Super7, and the line is called ReAction, as in reactioning an action figure. As I understand it, this line actually began with real-life molds of Alien action figures that did not come out because it was an R-rated movie for toys. And so a few years ago, they brought those out and they just decided, hey, you know, this did well for us. Let's make all these other IP and stuff. And now they're at Willow, and we have, 6 figures announced. You can buy them all for the low price of $120 right now on the super7.com. You have this open, Cameron? Can you see the pictures of our...
I do not, but I looked at it previously, and this is all new figures from the TV show Willow.
Yeah.
And then they previously had done a couple of waves of action figures from the original movie, as if they had come out in the 80s.
Yes.
And when we were originally doing our research for the first episode, I saw those and sort of Mandela effect tricked myself into believing they were actually old toys that I remembered from the past. So I'm still a little fuzzy on what's
even though they're designed to look old and not that great. They look way better than the actual Willow toys we had from Tonka in the late 80s. But yeah, this line
is the non-posable,
right? So these toys here, if you go to super7.com, you can take a look at them yourself. But we have going left to right in the image, they have Scourge is one of the bad guys you can get. Scourge is the dude with the big metal stuff on top of his head. I don't even call it a helmet. It's
more of a cage.
Yeah, like a cage on his head, basically, and chains all around him. He actually looks pretty good and pretty detailed. Maybe a little too good for this line. I think he's probably the best looking figure. Next to him, we have Valentine, who's infected, and he's got these kind of 3 boils on him, I guess you could say, to show that he's infected. He looks okay, I guess. Then Elora is right next to him, and she's a decent old school looking action figure, I guess. Really big eyes. I guess the actress has pretty big eyes, but I'm gonna say Willow for last.
An important choice.
Yeah, I'm gonna say Willow for last. But we have Jade as well, who's a pretty good likeness. I think that's one of the better ones as well. Kit is an okay looking figure, I'd say. The features are a little plain, but it's all right. Willow, I mean, he looks like Willow, but he also could just as easily be Ma Fratelli from the Goonies, I think, or Mama from the Train, that actress. If you had told me like that was the face that they were using, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, these will...
I did notice...
Oh, go ahead, yeah.
I did notice there's a distinct lack of Borman action figure.
Yes, and Graydon, and Eric. And
well, I have my priorities.
Yeah, I gotta think they have a second wave planned. If these sell well enough, then they'll make that second wave. And you'll get those figures and probably like maybe Christian Slater's character we haven't seen yet.
Oh my gosh, I keep forgetting that he's still yet to come.
We can talk about a little bit more.
I know. I know. I keep harping on about how I have no sense of nostalgia, but these are as close to a center target shot for me. I probably won't end up buying them, but they do really remind me of my old Star Wars Kenner figures.
Yeah, I will not end up buying them, but it's cool that they exist. $120 for the 6 of them is a little steep.
Yeah. I mean, but that pretty much sums up all of Willow for me. It's cool that it exists. I'm glad.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, that does it for news this week. Tune in next week when we probably won't have any news at all. Let's talk about the show.
Before we leap right into this week's episode, Chapter 5, I wanted to go back and talk real fast about Chapter 4, because I watched it again. And to be honest, I watched that last scene probably 3 more times. And it probably wasn't until the 3rd or 4th time I watched it when my wife asked, "Hey, why does that statue look terrified?" And it occurred to me to look a little closer at the image. And the statue that Eric is climbing on top of, the face, the mouth is sort of parted in surprise, and the face does not look happy. So I paused it, and at that point I began to look at all the other enormous statues all around that background. And where you might expect statues to normally be posed in sort of triumphant sort of poses, every one of these statues is in a position of submission or fear, or looking like they're about to die. There are statues that are curled up into fetal positions. There's a statue that I thought was sort of dramatically pointing, is actually raising up one hand defensively as it reaches down. And as my wife asked, what kind of culture builds statues like that?
Yeah.
So with that in mind, I was really excited to see more of the immemorial city this week. And I had lots of hopes to have some of those questions.
Spoiler alert, you didn't. But that actually, if you had just talked about those poses, I think you were talking about like Pompeii, like Mount Vesuvius, and all the slaves and everybody who succumbed to the volcano, and we found their remains perfectly preserved and that sort of thing. That's what it reminds me of.
You are not the only person who mentioned exactly Pompeii to me. And again, there is volcanic ash drifting down throughout this entire scene. Now, these clearly do look like they're constructed statues, but there is a real vibe of a frozen disaster that is sort of echoed in that imagery very much by Pompeii.
Cool. Well, I too noticed something. I didn't watch the episode again, but in the previously on, I didn't notice before in the tapestry that Kit basically sees herself as Bavmorda. Did you notice that?
I didn't notice that until I watched it again as well. The reason I noticed it again is because friend of the show, David Collins, pointed out to us that the voice of Bavmorda was done by the same actress who played Kit, who did a great job doing a Bavmorda voice. But once I knew that was her voice, I suddenly realized, oh, that's her face too.
Yeah, it's pretty much like the Luke in the Dagobah cave scene, where he chops off the Vader helmet and sees his own face.
Funny you should say that. Yes, it is very much like that.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know that we saw anything else in this particular episode to elaborate on that, and I don't know why they really focused on that in the previously on part. But
yeah, there were a couple of previously on elements that didn't seem to come to fruition in this episode. But I think that keeps me on my toes, so I don't mind.
Yeah, maybe it's a way to throw us, like, to, keep this in mind, but maybe it doesn't matter for this episode as much.
I am always here for a meal of red herrings if prepared well.
Yeah. It makes me wonder, we normally talk about theories at the end. I don't really have any organized theories, but I am just thinking right now, like, could it be a situation where maybe we find out that Kit is Bavmorda or something, and because not to spoil those wonderful Chris Claremont books for you too much, Cam, but can I spoil it for you?
Yes, you may. The books are doing a fine job spoiling themselves.
Yeah, this is kind of the question always comes up, like, is there any elements of the book in it? And it seems like there isn't, but there's also kind of is if you point at certain things. So, and I only know this because I read an article summarizing how crazy the books are and not all that great, but they do have a really cool kind of twist in the second book, Shadow Dawn, I think it's called. And so you go through the whole first book and most of the second book not knowing who the deceiver is, who's the adversary you're up against, the Elora is up against. And so Elora meets the deceiver and finds out that it's actually herself, like an older version of herself. And the older version of herself was actually trying to save the world, and in doing so caused the cataclysm that killed everybody that we love. At the beginning of the book.
That's
so
very tragic.
So yeah, I do wonder, like, is that something like that? Is that what's being indicated here? I don't know.
I doubt there's going to be that. I doubt there's going to be that sort of timey-wimey loop to it. I wouldn't be against it. I mean, I generally like that trope. But they certainly haven't built anything in that direction.
Yeah, well, it is, I think it's more likely it is basically a Luke seeing himself in Dagobah's situation, except we already know the familial ties at this point. It's just like
sins of the father, or mother in this case.
Exactly.
So this episode, we open up with a much more familiar looking, this chapter, we open up with a much more familiar looking book that opens up in a legible English font. And then the first image we get is Borman's face, sort of frozen in surprise and wide-eyed shock. And I really like this upon second viewing because it completely sets the tone of the episode, which this is a character-driven comedy episode.
Yeah.
We've come right out of a horror exorcism episode. And this is a highly character-driven comedy episode. Like, they just spun the genre dial.
Did you catch what the first caption was once we see Borman's face?
I did not, but I'm going to guess it was something to the effect of rock and roll music.
Rock music playing is the very first thing we see. And it is. I looked it up. After hearing the song, they have the song in the credits. It's called "Time for Some Mayhem" by a band called Arre, A-R-R-E exclamation, A-R-R-E exclamation. A song. Oh, go ahead.
Is that a cover?
I don't know if it's a cover. I know it's a song from 2021 that sounds like it's from 1979. I thought it was the Ramones at first, actually. I thought it was...
it does have that... Yeah. It has that sort of Ramones energy.
Yeah.
And I know that I'm the huge curmudgeon when it comes to modern music and lyrics playing in modern music. And I have to say, I'm broken. This totally worked. I loved it. I started laughing as soon as it was happening. And I was completely on board.
And it's the first time... We did have... like a guitar in the middle of an episode once, but I think this is the first time in the middle of an episode, actually the very beginning of an episode, that we're getting modern music.
Usually it's reserved for the credits.
About it is indeed time for some mayhem, which is the title of the song at this moment. They are being pursued by the Gales.
Apropos.
To the Gales.
Yes, we also get one of the Gales. The shape-shifting Gale is named helpfully by the subtitles this time, and their name is the Dag. D-A-G.
Yes, and I have mixed feelings about the scene in general. I do like the whole starting things off with them just like running away from the Gales, and because you got the sense that something like that was going to happen, but why waste the time of the pursuit? Just get there and have two of them. Who knows where the other ones are? Did we only see those two?
We only saw those two, but yes, you're right. Quite literally cutting to the chase.
Yeah. But it did seem a little, I don't know, like it lacked a sense of urgency to me that it felt like it should have had, just because, I don't know, maybe it was the music, maybe it was the jokes, maybe it was a little bit of both, but I never really felt like our heroes were in danger.
No, it definitely has more of a Benny Hill sort of danger vibe to it than an actual, they're under threat. The one thing I think they did that was really nice that did sort of underline the threat was, I think this is the first time I've seen Borman look legitimately terrified. And he's sort of running away with this look of fear. So I think that sort of lended a nice urgency to it that might have otherwise been stripped by the silliness and the jokes. Sure. I think generally it worked entirely for me. I think the Willow's flamethrower, where Borman, quite as an audience insert, asks, "What the hell was that?"
Yeah.
And Willow just says, "Don't worry about it," which is as much to us as it is to Borman, because that flamethrower is never explained again and never justified. It's
I kind of wonder if it will be, and I
it.
do, just given Willow's track record for magic and trying to avoid using it, I do think like there is some sort of actual literal flamethrower-ness going on here.
Between that and the Cermillion wax that he was keeping in the he definitely has a penchant for explosives. I would be very happy if they never discuss the flamethrower again, and that's the only time it's referenced. I would really love.
Well, I know early on, before we really knew what this show was all about, you saw a promotional image of that flamethrower in action, and you were like, "Okay, I've seen this, and I'm totally won over on the show already."
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was probably one of the only few promotional images that I saw, and it's so deeply and confidently silly, which is what this show has really ended up being, deeply confidently silly.
Yeah, that's a good summation there, I think. Confidently silly. And I think that's definitely rubbing some people the wrong way, but I think as long as you accept that the show knows what it is and that's what it wants to be.
And look, it's not for everybody. If this is rubbing you the wrong way, that's 100% valid, and God bless you. And that's real. That's fine.
Right.
I totally understand.
Yeah. So they are getting kind of pinned down, and they have the Gales coming after them, and they decide the only way to get rid of them is to go into the Wildwood.
Yes, which is helpfully right next to them at that moment.
Yes. And I think just a little nitpick I have here is like they go in there and the Gales are just afraid of it. Like,
yeah, I actually kind of have written down a question there. Why can't they enter? And when I'm in a good mood about something, I like to carry water for a story when it has holes in it. So I'm wondering if the Wildwood being the same sort of mysterious fey wilderness that we saw in the first Willow movie, potentially there's something elemental that protects it from the crone and the Gales, that keeps them out, because there is a really distinct shot of them stopping and looking frustrated by the heroes going into the Wildwood. So if I were making apologia, that would be that's my headcanon.
Maybe they're allergic to trees. We haven't seen them around trees yet. We've seen them around stone castles and whatever they were, ruins or whatever it was they were with today.
I don't know what they're running around there, but it looks like the set of a Call of Duty level. It's got perfect cover. And now, did you notice that the Scourge had a new arm after Borman chopped off his left arm the last time they saw?
Check that out.
He's got a big iron club worked into his flesh lump. Yeah.
Yes, I should have thought to look at that. But yeah, I thought he looked great. I thought the Scourge especially looked pretty awesome.
The head cage is a very attractive design.
Yeah. I still want to know what the practical use of that is.
To look terrifying.
I guess so.
So our heroes all enter the Wildwood, and we have this beautiful color shift from this cooler sort of grayer blue on the outside to this vivid bright green. that is punctuated by fireflies and butterflies, and it really makes it feel like a sort of enchanted woods. It's just a really cool environment.
Did the one shot of Elora totally remind you of that butterfly anime meme? You know what I'm talking about? There's this anime guy who like sticks out his hand as a butterfly, and I think the whole thing is like the caption says, "Is this a pigeon?" But
yes,
it totally reminded me of that from another angle, and I gotta wonder if that's intentional, just given the audience, the core audience this show seems to be going for.
In about 24 hours, I'll have a screen cap with the correct font on it for you,
with the caption of "Is this a pigeon?" or maybe there's something more willowy we could put there.
I'm gonna make your Elora meme for you.
Yes, that's the next step, the Elora meme.
Now, we're also told when we enter the Wildwood that that one of the dangers of the Wildwood, besides wanting to stay there forever, is that that's where the Bone Reavers have fled to. And the Bone Reavers still, at this moment, are this ephemeral, masked bad guys who we don't know anything about other than they are like robbers or bandits, basically.
Yeah, and we're also led to believe that it's seductive and you don't want to leave, and there are perils. Which, we'll talk a lot about this later, but I'm not sure how much of this that lives up to.
Yeah, I wonder if that's maybe sort of a myth and a legend propagated by other people to keep people out. Whether that's an unreliable narrator sort of a thing going on at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I took that because the reasoning behind why the Gales would not go in there, because they know how bad this is for anyone who enters the Wildwood, even for characters such as themselves. But I don't.
And it doesn't seem like they would be that the Gales would be terrified of the Bone Reavers, particularly from what we know about them so far. They are just people after all, but they do definitely seem to be stopped entirely by the Wildwood. Inside the Wildwood, we have a really lovely sequence with Borman trying to give advice to Graydon about girls. Yeah. And it's a really, I really wanted this scene to happen. So when it is dramatically put on hold for the advancement of the plot, I was really disappointed for Graydon. He needs that help.
And
I was rooting for him.
We possibly had 2 80s movies references.
I am so glad that you catch any references, because I didn't catch a single one this time.
Borman says, "Have you got the Ghoulies?" Ghoulies, of course, a low-budget horror movie from the 80s.
Yes. A classic of the VHS horror section.
I know what it is. And then at one point he says, "Graydon, Bubby," just like in Die Hard, Hans, Bubby.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to give you that one. 100%.
Another 80s movie. Yeah, I mean, it's got to be. Yeah, and it's probably the actor just completely riffing there too. I think. I think he did actually skip maybe a part where Sherlindria's wand is discussed between Willow.
Yes, yeah. Willow talks about Sherlindria's wand being a splinter of the great tree at the center of the world.
At the center of all things. He talks about, this did make me laugh, magical pedagogy, to which Elora goes, "Ew."
Yeah. Yes, that certainly was a joke that happened on the Willow TV show.
I don't know, that made me laugh more than it should have, probably. But I did think it was interesting. You barely hear it. I don't know if I would have heard it if I didn't see it in the captions. Willow distinctly says, "In the wrong hands, Sherlindria's wand is a powerful instrument of unimaginable destruction." So I don't know if he's leading up to something we see later in the show, or if it's foreshadowing for something later on where it does fall into the wrong hands and create some unimaginable destruction. Perhaps the town,
why not both?
The immemorial city. I don't know. I'm just thinking about that now, based on what you said earlier.
Certainly, some destruction happened there. Yeah,
unimaginable. Although it has been imagined and put in on film, so I guess it's not unimaginable. I think that's the basic idea of unimaginable destruction. I don't know. That's a thought. What do you think about that? You think Sherlindri's wand could be involved in your destruction of?
Not necessarily the wand itself, but we certainly have not been introduced to this concept of the great tree before, splinters of which have, incredible magic. So, yeah, I don't have any strong predictions. I really want to see that immemorial city thread unfold the way that they're going to do it. But it is clearly something terrible happened there, and magic has led to nothing good so far.
I did find the great tree comment interesting too, because often in mythologies there's a great tree.
Yes,
one is Yggdrasil and
Yggdrasil, Axis Mundi. There are a whole bunch of world tree and sort of center of the world mythological.
I did a video game where I wrote called Operencia, the Stolen Sun, where like 2 of the levels are on the world tree, or sky high tree as they call it in Hungarian mythology. So yeah, the great tree is a plug for my game. I think it might be on sale right now. I don't know.
Let's put that in the show notes.
Yeah, and I imagine our new friends at What the Force will delve into that, because they're all about the mythology. And just
hi, y'all.
If I haven't destroyed them yet, they'll probably tell about how awesome that is.
Yeah, well, like Willow's hex magic, I don't see that working out too well.
Mediocre at best is what I am in Texas. All right, so we're like 5 minutes past what we were talking about, how Graydon and Boorman were having like this lovely conversation, and then the plot advances.
Yes, so Graydon and Boorman are about to have their beautiful heart-to-heart gentleman talk when Boorman notices a skull on the ground. Now, this skull, on second viewing, I noticed, has very sharp teeth. And as I looked again, a lot of the skulls that we see coming up have very sharp teeth, which leads me to wonder how many of them are actually human. Boorman obviously knows what this portends, and he has everybody very calmly sit down and look at him and say, "Please trust me," which I thought was a very nice way of him sort of taking charge of the situation. Again, Boorman is sort of secretly shepherding everybody into safety. But that's when the Bone Reavers show up and imprison everybody.
Do you think maybe they're troll skulls?
Yes. Okay. Yes. I think that as I'm looking at the Bone Reavers' helmets, I think the majority of them are trolls.
Okay. Interesting.
And I wonder how much of their head taking and head boiling is bluster. Which they specifically admit later that the masks are intentionally about generating fear and an image.
Interesting.
And you don't have to take somebody's head to pretend you took somebody's head. So I'm thinking that many of the Bone Reavers' helmets are actually trolls.
Were they not human teeth filed down to just be intimidating?
No, unless these people had like 4-inch regular molars to begin with.
Yeah.
They're very long and sharp and spiky.
Just didn't really register. Maybe.
Now, before I do,
go ahead.
Before I do complete apologies for the Bone Reavers, there are plenty of human skulls on a post in the middle of their town. So definitely some light murder is occurring.
What is murder if it's not, light murder's fine, right? As opposed to heavy murder.
It's just, medium, we'll talk.
It's like in Princess Bride, where there's mostly dead and all dead, right? There's light murder,
Yes,
and heavy
exactly.
murder. Yeah.
Yeah. Light murder. There's a real Robin Hood vibe immediately to the Wildwood and the Bone Reavers, despite the fact that they are ostensibly threatening to all of our characters. There is something distinctly sort of merry about it right off the bat. That might just be my inherent propensity to identify with dirtbags. And I got excited when I saw this whole like dirtbag city in the woods. But there's a friendliness to that and a lightness to it. The colors are really bright.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I totally see the Robin Hood, but my thought was Ewok Village. Like our heroes being taken in by the Ewoks, and they're about to eat them.
It's interesting you should say that because I lied. I did catch an 80s movie reference here, and it is also Return of the Jedi, but we'll come back to it.
Okay.
So we are then introduced, as everybody is captured, first to the Bone Reaver that recognized Borman in our initial episode, who we are introduced to as Lori Toth. Lori, yeah. Somebody who Borman clearly knows very well, and he knows Borman very well. But then we're introduced to the leader of the Bone Reavers.
Can I talk about Toth real quick?
Woman...
I got a little Toth anecdote, basically, or believe it or not. So I was actually fascinated by the actor because he looked really familiar to me. He's been in some things. I can't say for sure that I recognize him from those things. Like he's been in a couple Jurassic movies, the last two of which I have not seen myself, so I'm not sure if I've seen him. But he reminded me of Ogre from Revenge of the Nerds a little bit. I think that's what ultimately made me think he was familiar. But I looked up in the process of trying to find out who this actor was. I looked up Toth Willow, and something actually came up as Garrig Toth on fandom, Willow's fandom page. The description is one of the few knights of Galladoorn who survived the battle it lands in against Nockmaar.
Oh my!
There's no citation. Doesn't say what that's from. I imagine it's probably like a character in the book, in the novelization.
Well, there's something called the Willow source book, which, if not for a few $100s, I would have bought off eBay. That I believe is sort of a way to run a role-playing game, a tabletop game, in the Willow universe with Willow characters. And I think a lot of that extra lore that I see tends to come from that book.
Yeah. So I wonder if it's just a coincidence, probably is, or if there's some relation between Lori Toth and Garrig Toth, who fights for Galladoorn, whereas we'll find out later that Lori Toth is not a fan of Galladoorn at all.
Yeah, yes. An homage at the very least.
Yeah,
certainly.
Yeah. And just a fun side note, the name Toth, just a personal thing. Did you play the original Final Fantasy? I feel like we bonded over the original Final Fantasy at one point too.
Yes, yeah, I feel like that's probably less rare than bonding over Willow, but we definitely bonded over Final Fantasy.
The strategy guide that came with, it didn't come with it. It was like if you had a Nintendo Power subscription. The fighter, I think it was a fighter. His name was Toth. Has nothing to do with this. But whoever played through the game chose Toth as a name, and that name has always stuck with me. And I thought it was a dumb name, Final Fantasy, because you had 4 characters, right? Like to be Chris, I was CRIS, and I was always like racked my brain, like what is Toth short for? And maybe they just
now you know.
Maybe they just like the name, and whoever wrote that strategy guide would one day go on to be part of Lucasfilm naming characters. I'm gonna go with that.
So a Willow reference years before its time, traveling through the ether.
Yeah. So what a dumb side note that was. Let's go on.
So then after, hang on, sorry. So then we're introduced to the actual leader of the Bone Reavers, who is a formidable-looking woman named Scorpia, with an incredible sort of scarification / white tattoo across her forehead.
Yeah, I looked at the tattoo. There were elements of a scorpion there, but I wouldn't say it looks like a scorpion for a character named Scorpia.
It's a striking design, and it's along with a very striking hairstyle that she has as well. Now she's obviously someone who also has history with Boorman, and again, I love watching Boorman be on the wrong side of things, like because he's so charming, even when he's clearly doesn't have the power in a conversation. It's a delight.
Oh, and he has a plan. We haven't mentioned he has a plan.
Or he claims to have a plan. Yeah. But he's quickly whisked away into Scorpia's tent, and then Kit does the dumbest thing imaginable, which is just announces that she's royalty, and just sort of asks for help. And I love this because it's dumb. Willow rolls his eyes at it, but it's so in keeping with Kit's sort of misunderstanding about how the power structures of the world work outside of her castle.
Yeah.
And she's just so confident that it's going to work out in her favor because she is who she says she is.
Yeah, and it doesn't. It doesn't help her at all.
Not at all. In fact, they separate everybody into separate jail cells according to who would be funniest to put them together. Putting Alora and Kit together, and Graydon and Willow in a separate cell together.
Yeah, as we'll find out a bit later, they also apparently don't search them for weapons or don't care that they have things on them.
These are tiny concerns. The Bone Reavers have no time for this.
Yes, those are no guards.
Only a few sticks for a gate. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess they don't have
being imprisoned being imprisoned really is a pretense to getting later into the story. And I appreciate that they took such a light comic tone with it. Boorman, of course, is taken back into Scorpia's tent. And there's another moment where we get a sense of the time scale. She says it's been 80 moons since they last saw each other. And also going by with what sources...
We haven't mentioned what he did that made them think he was dead. He was at the dread mines of Skellen.
Yes, which is run by trolls.
Yes, and no one ever escaped.
And if you had asked me a few hours ago, are trolls sentient in the Willow universe, I would have said, of course not. But now I'm led to believe that they run some sort of mining operation involving slave labor.
Yeah, it totally reminds me of Solo, to go back to, the people working on this who worked on Solo as well. It's the Spice Mines of Kessel setup almost. There's even, we'll see very shortly, like Boorman in presumably the Dread Mines of Skellen. And there's like dudes in like these gas mask type attire, and they.
I want to talk about that in a minute. Yeah. To roll back, she says that he's been gone for 80 moons, and then correlating that with what Sorsha said in the past about it being 200 moons since the events of the Willow movie. This is like our first big timeline setting thing for how long ago Boorman was a part of the Bone Reavers.
Yeah.
So he, that's got to be almost, if we assume 200 moons is about 20 years, which is what they've told us in the promotional material, 80 moons has to be about 8 years.
That's correct.
So he's been gone a considerable amount of time.
Yes.
Now Scorpia is really she's mad at him, obviously, but there's this really lovely moment where she's walking around him in circles. And, he says something very flirty, which is, I still aim to please. And as she walks behind him, she goes from being very dour and very threatening in his eye line to smiling very sort of charmed by him, and then immediately snaps back to very serious when she crosses back in front of him. And I love how much that little tiny bit underlined how much history they have between the two of them, because their chemistry is immediately so good as well.
Yeah, I really liked her performance. I thought she was a really nice, strong new character overall.
Yeah, I think there's reason to hope that she might continue on as a character in the main story. So,
yeah, I can see that. But yeah, so Borman he tries to explain how he escaped these dread mines. And he tells a story that correlates to footage that doesn't really go with that story.
Yeah, we have a classic unreliable narrator montage where he tells this very heroic version of his tale, and we get the actual imagery of what happened.
And part of me is like, is that even the actual imagery of what happened, or is that something else entirely? You know, like
that also might be Borman's own internal memory of it, because he does shower for an exceedingly long time during his memory of it.
And that shower totally reminds me of 1980s soap commercials.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's obvious how much fun he had doing that, because the shower slow motion goes on for probably about 4 or 5 more seconds longer than I would have expected. And his joy at being able to throw his hair around in slow motion just increases with every second.
Yeah, and he needed that because he had just come out of a barrel of sewage or something.
Yeah, it seems like he sort of smuggled him out of the dread mines of Skellig.
Yeah, Skellig.
With inside of a barrel of feces is what it looks like. But the guys who are moving it out are wearing what looks like a full body radiation suit and some sort of old school mining, or not miners, but welders goggles with the sort of the slats to block out light, or old school glacier glasses. And I can sort of already hear people complaining about anachronisms. But I'm delighted. It was such a weird and unusually novel image, even for what we've seen before. I want to know more about these guys in weird mining suits.
Yeah, and it actually made it feel more like Kessel to me too. they look kind of similar to the Pike clan from Kessel.
It has a very industrial feel to it.
Yeah, and I wonder, like, is that, like I was saying, like, are we seeing the actual images? Because, what he's talking about when he says that is, I fought my way out. And he's actually in this tub of whatever goop. Could be feces. I don't know.
It's poop.
And that's a fight in itself. I guess that's not completely untrue. It's rather disgusting.
He's being vague, assuming you will assume something more heroic, but yeah.
And during that sexy shower, he says all that mattered was getting back here. So that's obviously not true.
Right. In the flashback, it seems very clear that he drank his way around until he was arrested and then taken up again by Sorsha, who, if we're running the timeline, she would have known him as Mad's squire.
Yeah, and it just seems kind of a petty reason to get him jailed for that long in Tirazleen. I feel like there's a lot more that, again, that's another thing that's been thinking, maybe not everything we're seeing is accurate either.
Well, it's also possible that, his years of running as a Bone Reaver came with legal consequences once he was back on the Tirazleen side of the law.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So, it's like if you're a Bone Reaver, there's just, it's life in prison for you at best.
Yeah, 3 strikes, you're out.
Interesting. Yeah, I could see that. Question: so there's a scene where he gets arrested and he's having fun in a bar, and these women at the bar say, "Hey, sugar buns." Have you ever heard of sugar buns anywhere?
Yes. Yes, I have.
Okay. I don't know that I have, but it did remind me of another 80s movie where tell me if you spot this one. Is that you, Sugar Bumps? It's me, Sugar Bumps.
I'm not even gonna edit in where I pretend that I did know this. Now, what's it from?
That was Jack Palance as Boss Grissom in Batman, followed by Jack Nicholson as the Joker in Batman. Saying,
wow, man.
Yeah, so Grissom thinks he's talking to his girlfriend who, was cheating on him with Jack Nicholson's Jack Napier turned Joker. I know that movie by heart more than I know Willow even. And
deep cut.
Is that you, Sugar Bumps? It's me, Sugar Bumps. And then, as you can see,
yeah, I'll give it to you. That's a reference.
Yeah, so then we cut over to our. Did they just mishear that and made another 80s reference? Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. It's like poetry. It rhymes.
Exactly, George. Exactly.
So we cut over to our next pair of unlikely captives, Willow and Graydon. And Willow's looking for a way out, and Graydon just wants to gossip about why Alora is giving him the cold shoulder, which we all know at this point is because she has seen something about him. But I think this is the first time we get like a really not subtext but super text hint that Graydon really is infatuated with Alora.
Yeah.
And that's all he's thinking about.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've been checking Twitter and stuff this week, but I think largely led by our friends at the What the Force, there is this Grayola. Have you heard of Grayola?
Yeah, I'm new to fandom in general, so I tend not to see these things. But having run a Willow podcast and the associated Twitter account, I have been exposed to these things for the first time.
Yeah. The whole Raylo thing existed. I knew it was a thing, and it wasn't really in my circle. But now this the Grayola thing. Having a Willow podcast, this sort of thing, the word ship, which I would never use to do for anything except for a vessel that carries goods from harbor to harbor. The word ship,
and that's how old
is
we
now
are. Right
something
there.
I'm seeing a lot. People shipping Graydon and Elora, and is Graylora is what they're calling it.
I mean, I think there's two things to that. There's the really nice forbidden tension of, she's on this quest to save somebody else, but they have this obvious chemistry. But there's also the fact that the two actors themselves have incredible obvious chemistry.
Yeah, it's great.
And I've seen a couple of sort of behind the scenes snapshots, and it's clear that they are as close as they are pretending to be as filthy lying actors. And I think that really, really shows through. And I think, I don't know anything about fandom. I'm an old man. But it's not surprising to me to see people sort of gravitate to the two of them as having something potently cute and complex.
Yeah. And that brings us to a segment I like to call the Weekly Wince.
Oh boy, here we go.
Where one of us, so far it's only been me, tries to make you laugh with something truly awful. In the past couple of weeks, we've had when Willow mourned his best friend. He was a Silas mourner. Last week, of course, we had the classic tongue twister, Pompous Princess picked a peck of pickled possum. And that brings us to the Grayola phenomenon. There's other things you could call it. So, they each have last names, right? Elora Danon and Graydon Haster. So, you put them together and you get Daster. And I'm going to tell you why I like Daster. One, it's easier to say. It's one less syllable. Two, if you put them together, they're a dastardly duo.
All right, you got me. You got me. All right, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why I like it is because I immediately thought you were going to do a Dannon yogurt joke.
Oh, that's next.
And I was worried. Oh boy.
Yeah.
See, I was just going to give you credit for surprising me and going.
I'd like to propose another ship for Elora, in the spirit of her last name being Dannon yogurt. What if we shipped her with a certain other magical Disney Plus character? This time, we go with the fact that the word Dannon sounds like Dannon yogurt, and we take the other magical Disney Plus character, Grogurt.
Chris, I take back the nice thing I just said.
And there you have it. The weekly wins.
Thank you. I will try to rise to the challenge and contribute at some point to that.
Should we cut to commercial here?
Yeah. Why don't we take a real quick word from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. And we're back. And we were with Willow and Graydon. And Graydon was worrying about why Elora has been sort of cold to him. And, Willow says, you did try to banish her soul. That tends to put a dampen on things. And Graydon says at that point, well, that wasn't me. I was possessed by that other guy. And that really sort of brought to mind that I was curious last time how much possession by the Lich was actually the Lich, or how much of it was actually Graydon, or Ballantine for that matter. Because you both times hear those people talking as themselves. Graydon says, I'm strong and confident now. Isn't that what you wanted? Which I interpreted as being, Graydon, and essentially drunk, or, intoxicated in some way and saying something that is his sort of darkest desire. And that's part of the Lich's possession. But Graydon really seems to say in this moment, that wasn't me at all. And later we get the real quick hint that wasn't him, because Graydon still doesn't know that Willow lied about Bavmorda. Whereas in the last episode, Graydon was in the room where Willow was unmasked as a mediocre wizard. In this episode, he says, but you're Willow, you're this great. So he clearly, Graydon was not conscious for that moment of Lich possession, which means that those times when he's saying things like, I'm strong and confident, isn't that what you want? Isn't that why you love Eric? That's not Graydon drunk with power being gross. That's the Lich continuing to sort of poison the well for everybody's relationships wherever it can. And that's kind of nice, because I didn't want to believe that Graydon had that nice guy energy of will you like me if I'm a strong buff alpha male? But that was just the Lich being the worst possible thing it could be.
Yeah, true. Yeah, that's an interesting kind of parallel you drew there, and confirmation, basically. Of
And Willow seems irritated right off the bat that Graydon has romantic desires, and he's such a dad about it. He's so protective of Elora. But he also says basically that, there's no place to have a romantic relationship and save the world, which I have to believe as the premise and thesis of the show will be proven incorrect. That it has to be about saving the world and having close relationships with people.
Actually, now that you say that, I wonder too if there's a connection between him trying to be a hero and losing Kaya that we haven't learned yet.
Oh, yeah. I'm sad about that. I feel like I would like to know more about Kaya, because Kaya is such a warm and loving character.
I feel like we've got it. We've got to learn. It's a obvious dangling question, like what happened to
her
the whole
her
village,
absence
actually.
Can't really go.
We still don't know that.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right.
Maybe they were taken by trolls. Maybe we'll meet them in the next episode.
It's very possible.
Yeah.
Yes. And over in cell number 3, we have Kit and Alora, where Kit is freaking out that Jade is a prisoner of the Bone Reavers. And when Alora says, "Hey, look, I understand, the power of love is going to save us all," Kit says, you may have rolled in the grass with my brother a few times, but that's not like what Kit and I have, which is the closest she comes to ever putting a title on it. And she even backs off. She says, it says, "Oh, she's my best friend." And Alora really just sort of takes her to task and says, "Look, we all know, she knows, we all know. Mm-hmm. You're the only one who's not accepting it."
Yeah.
And I really like how much this episode was maybe a lot of contrived ways for characters to be put together in situations where they were forced to hash it out. But I really liked that. And I liked the pairings of characters that they did, and the way that they played off each other in this episode.
Yeah. I especially like those two together because, they were very much built to, I wouldn't say hate each other. I would say just Kit hates Laura, and Laura's like, "What's your problem?" And when they come together, and started last episode where they had a couple scenes, and of course the part where Kit was like, "Yeah, you're actually pretty awesome. Do what you feel like you need to do here." Whenever they get together, I feel like there's an interesting chemistry that, it's almost like jealous younger sister with Kit in some ways.
Yeah, there certainly is an element of jealousy, as there's an element of sort of royal jealousy, I think, as well, that she's the princess who's grown up all her life. And to a certain extent, when they get back after this quest, Alora is potentially a political usurper. So I think there's a lot of, of threats that Alora represents to her.
Yeah. Yeah. I just, I like it when those two are together because it is maybe a little forced to get them to talk, but when you have this opportunity, it actually works.
Yeah. One real quick thing, when we were talking about the Borman flashback, I thought it was very interesting that Scorpia asked directly about Madmartigan.
Mm-hmm. Not only that, she asked about the relic.
And the relic, yes, which I can only assume is the Quirus, but that might be a fool who makes that assumption. But it does lead me to believe that, after Madmartigan left Tir Asleen for some period of time, was he riding with the Bone Reavers?
Good question. Also mentioned in that same scene, Allagash. Do you remember who Allagash is that we know? Allagash is Christian Slater's role.
I did not know this. So I'm very excited.
So
now.
Yes, she mentions Allagash. So I have a pretty decent feeling we'll meet Allagash in the Troll Caves next week.
And all we were told about Allagash is, did Allagash make it? And no, and I hope he died in excruciating pain.
Yes, I only hope he suffered as much as possible before they killed him.
Yeah.
The trolls.
Yeah.
So
back.
Yeah, I mean.
So back over.
Sorry. And one thing we know about Christian Slater's character is that he has ties to Madmartigan. So.
Okay.
It's all checks out place. Here. Yeah.
Yeah. So back over in Team Willow and Graydon's cell, Willow makes the discovery that the cell that they're in also has a tiny brownie city built into the wall, which, talk about contrivances. Mm-hmm. And I do not care because it was just the right amount of silly.
Yeah, maybe a little too much silly, but it was good to see Rule again. Frangine no longer with us.
Yes.
As he moves out.
Yeah, and I liked Rule's daughter, who appeared to be wearing a rock and roll like concert T-shirt underneath a full body onesie.
Someone on the Willow Facebook pointed out it actually looks like an Eborsisk a little bit if you look close enough at it. Like it could actually be like a Willow fan shirt.
That's
which I guess makes sense. I mean, pick your real life figures, your bands, your political figures, whatnot. Here, there are shirts of them, so
we know that Graydon grew up reading pulp fiction novels about Willow and his exploits, so it stands to reason.
Yeah.
I wonder how much me watching these episodes at midnight lends towards my sort of affable good nature about a lot of this stuff. But I was very little didn't work for me in this episode, even though it was aggressively silly and very contrived in the way that things slotted together.
Yeah. I was glad they threw Rule in there. He's my favorite of the two brownies.
Yeah.
But it is a shame. I would rather have seen Frangine than Rule's daughter, who I don't really think added much.
Yeah. But... And I'm kind of glad they didn't come with them, because I think, especially having watched the original Willow movie recently, the challenge of having two tiny characters move alongside in a walking quest with regular-sized people is difficult, and I don't think they solved it in the first Willow movie. So
yeah, if you want to see the Brownies, I was really glad adventuring with Willow again, read the Chris Claremont books, and don't expect them to be anything close to funny ever.
Or wait for my exhausted summary that I will give you shortly. But when he says, "Look, I need you to come with us," Rule says, "No, you have this guy. You have sad, angry frown prince. He is your brownie now." And I like that as a sort of very direct passing on of the torch of, look, you have new funny characters now.
Oh, one of the jokes I had to look up, and after I looked it up, it was kind of funny. Do you know what decoupage actually is? I didn't know what that is.
It's a form of like art with paper.
Yeah, decoupage is the art of decorating an object by gluing colored paper cutouts onto it in combination with special paint effects, gold leaf, and other decorative elements. Commonly, an object like a small box or an item of furniture is covered by cutouts from magazines or from purpose-manufactured papers.
So even though I sounded completely not confident, I was exactly correct.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
And that's what
there's a
daughter wants to get famous doing, I suppose. Okay.
And then we have Alora and Kit escaping with the magic wand, which when it first doesn't work, she taps on it and blows on it like it was a Nintendo cartridge. Does that count? Does that count as an 80s reference? Maybe.
Okay, I'll give it to you. Why not? As much as sugar buns.
Yeah, but she blasts the door off her cage. And there's this really lovely joke that's entirely told in editing, which is that we cut back to Borman and Scorpia and they're already kissing. We've just missed a portion of that sequence. Yes. And, she takes the sound as proof that Borman has tricked them. And she says, "You've ensorcelled me with your sarcasm and magnificent beard." And I agree it's a magnificent beard, but also ensorcelled might be one of my top 10 favorite words of all time.
I think this is the first time I ever heard it. Have you used this word?
It just means to... Yes. Oh, I've used it primarily in D&D campaigns for children. But yeah, it just means to be taken over by sorcery. Okay. You've been ensorcelled.
I was not familiar with this term, but I did figure it out right away.
it's a delight. I encourage everyone to practice saying it all day long.
Yeah, I gotta say though, so Kit and Allura escape, and Kit has her sword, Allura has her wand, and they're surrounded by Reavers, and it's just like they just work their way through them like there's nothing to it, and it made the Reavers feel really non-threatening, and maybe that's true. I don't know, but
I will give you that, and I think there's a larger element to this show in that often I feel like complex scenes like this are staged. Maybe clumsy is the wrong word, but in a sort of less strict way, where we're not like, the scene is these two escape and have a moment of power. And they're not entirely worrying about the tactics of who's behind them and who's got the drop on who. It just sort of exists for the story. But yeah, there are some sort of staging beats like that where I sort of feel like it's a little unusual or stagey. But I also think there's also a running gag about Allura being supremely overconfident when making threats. So this is maybe the second or the third time that she's done this.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and it could be that, that the Reavers really don't want to hurt them, and
that's also a possibility. But it doesn't last long. They are very quickly disarmed.
Yeah.
And that is the point after they're disarmed that Kit lunges in and tries to take Scorpia hostage. And they have
or Jade. Jade does, right? Jade frees herself.
Oh my gosh, let's back that up. And that's the point where Jade breaks free. And after Kit and Allura are taken back into custody, Jade breaks free and attacks Scorpia. And they have this quick, brutal fight that is only stopped when Scorpia sees the brand on the back of Jade's neck. Now, we've never seen that brand before, have we?
Well, we've seen it on the front of General Kale's uniform, his armor.
Oh, is that actually directly off his armor?
That is the same pattern that Kale had. I know from my terrible Tonka action figure I've discussed in the past. I guess they got that detail right, because that is the same emblem.
So I got to ask, very quickly, Jade and Scorpia trade knowledge so they understand each other, and what we realize is that Jade is the daughter of General Kale.
Yes.
Chris, how did you feel about this?
Suddenly she's Luke Skywalker.
Yeah. Which makes that confrontation with her father's ghosts very much like the Dagobah Cave experience, doesn't it?
One other thing, I think it's really interesting after having this bit of knowledge, except for Borman, which may or may not be the case. We don't know that much about him in the vault and the voices he's hearing. Every encounter that someone had was familial in some way. You had Allura seeing her mother and herself. You had Kit hearing Bab Morda.
Oh yeah.
You had Graydon seeing his brother and father.
Yeah.
So that actually makes me wonder: is Borman hearing the voice of someone in his family?
Well, and to get really mushy and tie it in back together, I feel like this show is really bending towards the family that you choose as a thematic element as well. So I didn't notice. I probably should have noticed how many of these plot elements were about finding out your family history and untangling your family trauma.
Yeah, and I don't know. Thinking further about just Kale attacking her, saying "no mercy," like I wonder what that means. Like,
yeah, or
you did say Dagobah Cave. Yeah, I guess there's an element of that. But he obviously did not do the killing. He was.
No, he clearly didn't. Yeah. In fact, she says that General Kale had 15 children, of which Scorpia and Jade are the last. That really reminds me of like Genghis Khan having so many offspring, and sort of his offspring continuing on. There is so much stuff that we get in that brief conversation where she talks about who Jade is, but not only that, she says some things that made me sit straight up and yell, which is that Galladoorn had slaves in very recent memory. And I feel like if I had known that earlier, that would have changed my readings on a whole lot of stuff. So much of the political machinations that we get in the first Willow movie are from the perspective of an outsider who does not know Daikini business. So we don't know anything that's going on. We know Galladoorn is smashed. We know Nockmaar is somewhere else. I'm not even sure if Nockmaar was a country proper, or whether Nockmaar was just the fortress and then the army Bavmorda raised. Because very clearly she says that the army Bavmorda raised was slaves of Galladoorn that she helped to escape.
And
then she says,
oh, go ahead, sorry. No.
And then she says, and then so the slaves and after the fall of Nockmaar, the conscripts of Nockmaar, that those people all became the Bone Reavers.
Yes. So one thing that occurred to me, obviously the Galladoorn slave trade bad. But then
I have so many questions.
Bavmorda comes in with the promise of, I will free you if you serve me. That's slavery too. It's just it gives the illusion of free will. So it's not like it's not like we should be saying that she's like hero all of a sudden.
No, No. It certainly doesn't flip Bavmorda from heel to face. But and even if she's doing something of an evil reason, the people who became the Bone Reavers still took that ultimate message of freedom being important with them culturally as they left. And it's very hard for me to fault that viewpoint as a group of freed slaves who was then crushed by the army of the country that you used to be slaves from. I'm impressed by how quickly they flipped my sympathies to, what looked like a tribe of bandits with skull masks into being, Robin Hood and his merry men who are also former and freed slaves. So I feel much more warm about my beloved dirtbag Bone Reavers after this episode.
Yeah. I wonder too if that point I just made might come up from Jade or something, that like, were you not slaves of Bavmorda yourselves, having dedicated your servitude to her? And maybe that like gets them to truly have free will and decide that maybe Tyroslene's the way to go. I don't know.
Well, that might be, but the people that are the Bone Reavers now are, they were bare children when Bavmorda was killed, so they were never raised, following Bavmorda's wishes. They were born following this sort of nebulous, we are wanted by nobody, but we deserve our freedom, and we can be free here in the forest. So I free them from their Bavmordian sins. I think the modern Bone Reavers, I like where they're coming from.
So okay, I think this is a good spot to transition with my biggest beef with this episode. So they've got the Princess of Tyroslene there, who's their enemy. I don't know if they know who Graydon is. I don't know if he actually comes out and says, I'm the prince of your slavers. But
oh yeah, I mean, they might have some opinions.
they don't seem to care. They only care that they have Jade and Jade's with them, and so okay, everything's cool. And on the other side too, it's like these are the Bone Reavers. These are the people that they're terrorizing everything. Oh, they're actually cool because Jade is connected to them. That just like it's too easy. I don't know.
You're not wrong, and I'm not gonna defend it. But I do think the gag of Willow and Graydon coming to the back of this raucous party, thinking that they are going to rescue their friends, only to have Allura come out and be like, "Oh, hey, I missed you. Dinner's coming soon," I think was such a solid gag for me that I don't.
And then they joined the rave scene in Matrix Revolution or Reloaded.
I 100% wrote down, this looks like the rave scene from the one Matrix movie that is not good. I think there's 2 Matrix movies that are not good.
I didn't see number 4.
But yeah, I liked it. I counted among the good ones. But yeah, I think it's such a fun flip of your expectations. And because from that point on, this entire episode is a college party romantic comedy. And I loved every minute of them leaning into that very strange genre shift. Now, here's my 80s reference. I think when Allura comes out of that party and she's got her hair in sort of the new ringed hairstyle, she looks a lot like Princess Leia emerging from the Ewok village, where everybody else thinks, oh, we're in trouble. And she comes out and she's like, no, actually, we're hanging out here. These are my friends. See that. So I think the hairstyle there was my reference, my 80s reference.
I can see that. Actually, can we go back to that Scorpia Jade conversation real quick?
Please.
There's one thing that I just thought it was interesting when Scorpia says of Kale, he was killed by Madmartigan at the Battle of Nockmaar. Just the way she says it, her delivery, like for a millisecond, I had like sympathy for General Kale and thought Madmartigan was a bad guy.
Yeah, see, you're not immune to it too.
Yeah.
You've got the moral flips.
Yeah, just kudos to the actress on that one, I think, and just the way it's just an interesting. You know, in any war, not everyone is truly evil. There's, you know.
And especially with Madmartigan, I think it's even more complex than that because Kale was her father. Madmartigan killed her father too, but she also knew Madmartigan later as a friend of Borman's in some way. So it's not as simple as Madmartigan bad, Kale good now. But yeah, we have untangled some of the really like black and white morality without making it that sort of oppressive, oily, grimdark, nobody's happy version of it. Like it's a more interesting, it's a rainbow spectrum of morality instead of gray.
One thing to go off of something we discussed last time about food. The first thing, there's a couple things in the scene actually. Toth says to Allura, the soup is still a little cuminy. Yes. I wasn't clear if was that Toth's soup or was it Allura's soup that he was saying needed some help?
I think it's Toth's soup and that she was helping with magic. I absolutely love the joke of big, strong, tough guy has secret pursuit.
Yeah.
If you've ever seen the movie Tangled, I feel like 55% of the jokes in Tangled tread on that trope. But I genuinely love Toth's performance because he pivots from being a guy with a skull mask who says, I'm going to boil your skull, to being a guy who says, does this soup have too much cumin in it? Within about 4 minutes, and it's entirely and lovely believable.
Yeah, as believable as it can be, given the kind of political stuff that I probably not very believable.
I mean, I feel like part of the Bone Reaver vibe is sort of free spirit partying. So once they flip the switch to "we're not going to kill you," it makes sense that they're like, "Well, now we're going to party."
All right. Sure, I'll go with that, I guess.
And again, we also have a confirmation that Willow is being such a dad in that sequence when he's trying to get the wand back from Allura.
Yeah.
There's a great little bit where Scorpia gets up and does a speech in front of her people, and she says, "Slaves of Galladoorn, conscripts of Nockmaar, outlaws of the Wildwood," which is sort of like their people's history, the things that they were to come to this point. And then she gives their values, which are freedom, rebellion, passion, and joy until the break of dawn. And I would like to sign up for this newsletter. I'm 100% on board.
Can I tell you what 80s reference that? It's not a reference. I don't know if it's intended, but it totally reminded me of this from the 80s. Freedom, rebellion, passion, and joy. Jade is truly outrageous. Truly outrageous.
Thank you for gracing me with that little moment. That was a delight. I love that drugs are handed out at this point. And I was sort of like, oh, are they going to be kind of winky about this being like drugs? And then 2 seconds later, Allura is literally watching trails with her hands as she waves her hands through the air. So they were exceedingly unsubtle about that, which I genuinely appreciated. We have these sort of traditionally like druggy low camera angles, and everybody seems to be feeling it and enjoying their time.
Yes, these truth plums, right? That's what's causing all this.
Truth plums. It is impossible to lie when you eat the truth plums, which again is such a plot contrivance to make all the characters talk to each other. But it seems to me kind of like in keeping with the Dust of the Broken Heart.
Okay.
Where you just like you have a plot device that is like, look, we're gonna have all the characters have to talk, have to forced to hash their issues out, and I liked it, even if it is, a bit of a contrivance.
Yeah, the Dust of Broken Hearts was definitely a contrivance. I'd actually give this a slightly less contrived than the Dust of Broken Hearts.
Yeah. And I loved all the elements about that party. I love seeing Graydon with the flute jamming and like, being able to express himself without Kit telling him to knock it off.
Oh, there's totally a Raiders of the Lost Ark reference too. I'm sure you caught.
And
Kit drinking the other guy.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, she's totally doing the Marion
bar. It's totally. Yeah. No doubt.
Yeah, it's his oh yeah. Yeah. I loved how much the show just took a left turn and said, now we're having a party and everybody's going to drink. And I got to tell you, the music kicked in, modern guitars. And
can we talk about Graydon's makeover first?
Oh, absolutely. Please.
So he totally reminded me of somebody from the 80s too. Steven Van Zandt from the E Street Band.
Wow, full of deep.
I had to look up the guy's name, to be honest, but it totally reminded me of E Street Band guy, and it was Steven Van Zandt. He really looks like Steven Van Zandt, like really looks like.
I love how empathetically sad Laurie is when he's like, "Oh, you wanted to impress a girl? Girls like beards. You should have told us." Like, he's genuinely sad for poor Graydon.
That guy doesn't have a beard, but he doesn't have a girlfriend either.
Yeah. So then we have our record drop of our cover of a 1968 song, Crimson and Clover. And yeah, I don't know what happened, but I officially renounce all of my complaints. This worked just fine. It was the perfect soundtrack for that moment. And I think the Borman and Scorpia relationship, where he says, I really want to stay here and I wanted to come back, but also I'm not staying here. I really love the dynamic they have, because it's one where she is the much more powerful person. And she says, "Look, I could make you stay. I could make you my prisoner." And he says, "I already am."
Yeah.
And I love that he's willing to be the like less powerful and like submissive partner in that romantic relationship. I think that's really very, very cool.
That's cool. I just thought it was a cool line. That was a good line. I already am.
Yes, this is a very thirsty episode. And this was a particularly warm sequence.
Yeah. And then we have Allura and Graydon, right?
First, actually, we have Kit and Jade.
Oh, okay.
Sort of, and this is the first time they sort of say out loud, "Oh, by the way, we all took drugs, and now we can't lie to each other." And that's the moment where Kit says to Jade, "Yeah, I did suspect that maybe you weren't who they said you were, but I didn't know how to tell you, and I didn't know what your reaction would be." Which is, it seems sort of horrible that she didn't tell her anything, but also that also makes perfect sense. What possibly could her reaction be without any evidence on just a gut reaction? But I think it's there's so much that they have to untangle about Jade's life and the things that she's always assumed about her life. And I hope they give her the space to do that, because that's not something that she can just sort of, untangle right away.
Yeah.
Then we get Allura and Graydon, where he addresses to her for the first time, "Hey, are you treating me weird because of that whole thing?" And I love how often this show has just jumped straight to the chase. Instead of beating around it, she goes, "Yeah, I saw you kill your brother." And I really like that. And he has that thing where, just like before, he says it wasn't me. And she points out, like, and all these times in your life where these things have happened, it wasn't you. So who are you? I don't know that yet. And I think that's a really, I think it's a very like fair way of her reacting to that very negative bit of information that she's gotten. It's remarkably empathetic.
Yeah. Part of me is thinking that was an interesting dramatic tension between them that I feel like they just kind of erased almost in this. Like, I don't know. I don't feel like they did enough with that between, her knowing it and them actually talking about it. There's a couple of looks like at the end of the last episode and beginning of this one. I guess I can get over that, but I thought it was a little too soon.
Yeah. You're not wrong, but we only have 8 episodes, so I forgive a little chop jump into the gun.
Yeah.
And then we have probably my favorite of the Truth Plum discussions, where Kit and Allura are paired up together, and they're just being so like brutally mean girl honest to each other. About like, well, you're not as much of a screw up as I thought you were. And like, well, you are very mean, but you are very competent. Like, I really liked the sort of the brutal succinctness of it. And I think it was so charming and sweet that Kit then immediately goes and starts asking for romantic advice.
I also thought it was good that Kit, like, there was a humbleness to her we haven't seen yet. She says, "I was wrong yet again." Like, she's realizing she's not perfect.
Yes, and it's in sort of like direct in direct opposition to when earlier she sort of undermines Eric's and Allura's relationship of like, "Oh, you just rolled around in the grass a few times." She's really saying like, "Hey, you are more knowledgeable in this arena than I am." And the advice that Allura gives her is, take responsibility for being a screw up and say you're sorry, which is just generally very good advice. I like begrudging respect, and I think that's a really nice scene of begrudging respect between two characters who haven't given each other any respect.
That's an excellent,
so far.
Again, an excellent 2-word summation of that: begrudging respect.
Yeah. So Kit and Jade, after having a sort of a mild blow up where Jade says, "You're the expert in breaking my heart," which is terribly painful to hear, especially in Truth Serum land. Kit goes back up to Jade and asks, it says something sort of interesting. She says, "I need to talk to you." And then she stops and she says, "I would like to talk to you." And I think that's super nice because so much of so much of Kit's character has been her not understanding the power differential she has with other characters, and her not understanding her own privilege as a royal. And I think that's one of the first times I've seen her deliberately try to counteract that impulse where she's like, "I'm the princess, come talk to me now." But no, what she's asking is, "I would like to talk to you."
And in a way, speaking of royalty, they're probably not common ground, but they're close to common ground now, knowing that Jade is this bandit princess, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
well, as she says later, "My dad killed your dad."
Yes, indeed.
And Jade's response to that is, "I don't care," which I think is also like very honest because she hasn't had time to adjust to this new part of her life yet.
Plus, I don't think she necessarily likes General Kale.
No, certainly not. I mean, she might love her sister, and she might, genuinely have an affection for the people the Bone Reavers have become, as do I. But yeah, she doesn't have to like General Kale, the Conqueror.
Yeah, I mean, imagine just learning that your true parent was, like the leader of a hate group or something.
Yeah, I would need to go to therapy and deal with that slowly over the course of the rest of my life. So yeah, I understand that she's got to work through some things. Oh boy, in an episode full of longing and tension, I didn't realize how much they have stretched the tension between Jade and Kit until they got them like charged magnets right next to each other in this sequence. I don't normally get sort of like choked up in these sorts of romantic scenes, but this was so sweet, and so sweetly and simply written. As I was taking notes, I ended up basically just writing down every line at the end of their conversation about, I need you on the quest, no, on all of it, on life. And I don't want to have any adventures.
That's the line I wrote down.
Unless they're with you.
That's the one line I wrote down. I don't want to have any adventures unless they're with you.
As a romantic story about a D&D adventuring party, that is perfectly sweet. And I think then Jade's sort of stumbling admission that she's always been in love with Jade is just so well delivered, and it just made me realize how much tension there had been between them at that point.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of even felt it in the first episode to some extent, but they kind of got away from it for a while, and now it's definitely back.
Well, and I think starting it on that kiss and that confusion and that, where is their relationship in the first episode, basically had me in this constant, like, what is going on and who's gonna update me?
Yeah, I kind of wish that had been so many of the other kiss, like I mean, I guess if you look at it closely, it's kind of one-sided, but I kind of wish that was more of an almost kiss in retrospect.
In the first episode,
I think it would have.
Yeah,
like you could tell.
It's a very impulsive.
Yeah, like you could tell, like she wants to kiss her, but that doesn't actually happen, and there's a little more build up.
Yeah.
I guess they don't actually kiss here either.
Well, instead we get this incredible, in about 10 seconds, I'm going to kiss you. So if you don't want that, you better go. And I don't think I'm going to be able to stop. And God, what a lovely scene to be interrupted by the screaming visage of a troll over her shoulder.
Yes.
I don't jump easy, but I jumped off my couch at that point because I was so wrapped up in how romantic and sweet that moment was.
I kind of saw it coming, like I saw the dead quest leader coming.
Oh, I could feel the arrow coming for that guy in his red shirt a mile away. But this one, I was so wrapped up in the romance that the Bungie troll out of nowhere really got me.
You know, we did skip, before we start talking about trolls, we did skip something rather important with Graydon and Willow talking about Willow's
absolutely
actual role in the feat of Bab Morda.
Right, and that's what I was talking about, how that makes me feel like Graydon actually wasn't as conscious during the possession.
Right. Yeah, we talked about that, but like the actual like conversation here that Elora overhears.
Well, under the truth plums, Willow very clearly says what we've all understood and assumed throughout the last couple episodes, is that he knows he's mediocre. He knows he's parlayed his entire fame off of a single moment, and he knows that he's fallen short every other time. But yeah, Elora straight up hears him say it this time.
Yeah, and we don't really know what that means yet. How is she going to take that? I did write down what Willow said, and there's a funny side note I'll mention here in a second, but he says, behind all that wisdom, Willow Ufgood here is all that wisdom in quotes. Willow Ufgood here is terrified that one day he'll be discovered as the aging, talentless hack that he really is. I mean, I think that's just imposter syndrome a lot of us have, and all aspects
of it. I was going to say that's very, very, very relatable stuff, Willow.
Yeah. And the funny side note is when I typed that into my phone, it typed in behind all the wisdom, Willow Ufgood, because I've typed in what our rating of Ufgood more than I've typed in Ufgood, apparently, and it auto-corrected to Ufgood. Willow Ufgood here is terrified.
It's in your autocorrect forever.
Yes. But yeah. So trolls are attacking now.
Yeah, and we did hear very earlier on in the brownie conversation, there's a brief mention of troll raids. So this apparently is not an unheard of event. And again, when I started this episode, I thought trolls in Willow were non-sentient. But now not only do they run an industrial mine, but they have some sort of Bungie technology for abducting people in an aerial
there's actually a deleted scene that backs up the your previous assumption.
Yes, it's my favorite deleted scene in the world. It is if it's the one I think you're talking about, it's during the Battle of Tirazleen, as Willow is waiting for Madmartigan to be thrown over on the catapult. He has to distract the troll, and he does so with simple sleight of hand tricks, to which the troll scratches his head and then claps. Am I making that part up?
I think it's something like that. It's like a chimp, that kind of level of intelligence.
But apparently that is not canonical, because we have a different take on trolls now.
Right.
And I actually wanted to point out at the end of that episode, we know that Kit gets taken, but we also see that Elora is yelling, Willow, Willow, and then she's holding Willow's staff. So we don't see Graydon, and we don't see Willow, and we don't see Kit. But Scorpia is standing prominently among the other characters. So I really hope she has joined the party.
I didn't look that closely, I guess. I did think it was interesting that at this point I was expecting some sort of cover song to come in and, relate in some way to the action we've seen. And it was almost silent. I had to turn up the sound to even hear anything for a while until the I'll call them the black credits kicked in, where you don't have the character portraits and everything.
Instead of a song, we get that like the long howl of a troll before we cut to the painting credits.
So here's what I was thinking. They've gotten a certain degree of flack, I guess you could say, for this way that they're ending the show. So maybe they figured, hey, maybe our friend David figured this. I don't know. Maybe we can ask him if we ever do that interview. Maybe they figured, hey, let's put the music in the actual show this time, and we'll end it with silence and then something more instrumental, like probably the kind of thing you're expecting. And we have trolled you right after the trolls come into play.
I mean, without the pun, I mean, it's striking without the pun because it feels very frightening because you expect the music and it's very quiet. But no, let's say it's the pun. Always follow the pun.
Yes. Yeah. So that's the end. Do we have any other thoughts before we?
No, I think that brings us to our rating segment.
Okay. Who goes first? We should probably talk about this stuff before.
You go first.
I will go first.
Because I believe I've got... Yeah.
This is my least favorite episode, if I'm giving the truth plum of it all. I've consumed the truth plum.
As you should.
And it does have my second favorite scene of the series so far, which is the I Am Your Sister scene. We will call it. Okay. I did think that was quite good. There's some fun stuff that happens. But overall, like some of the problems I mentioned just doesn't quite sit right with me. So this is my least favorite episode.
Okay.
I'm going to go off. You're going to go off? Yeah.
I respect you.
I'm going to go off on this one.
Yeah.
I still have hope.
Okay.
Maybe it's because the last one was so good. So up and good as we discussed last week. I'm going to go off on this one. Hopefully it's the only off I give. We have 3 more episodes left. But on that dour note, I leave things to you, Cameron.
I think I almost would give it an off and good, but I think I'm going to back off and give it a good. It's tied for my second favorite, but I don't know what actually is my first or my other second favorite tied, so that's just bluster. Okay. I think on paper, especially as a very serious man who doesn't like it when modern music is in things, on paper, this episode should have worked the least for me. Like, I should have been furious the entire time. But I think, and again, this goes down to confident silliness. I so clearly saw the genre that they were shooting for and the tone of this episode. And it was so confidently silly that I really enjoyed it. So there's nothing you said that was wrong about your complaints and concerns. Just for whatever subjective reasons, I didn't care this time. I really had a blast. And I think a lot of that is probably that it's a more Borman-centric episode, so we just got more Borman and his truly magnificent.
It was interesting. I noticed too. We open with that shot of Borman and the kind of the art kind of coming in, and then it goes to his actual face. And we also closed with a very similar shot of Borman. I don't know if that was intentional. It probably was, but that was a nice bookend there.
Yeah. More Borman, the better.
Yeah, I have a feeling we're going to get even more Borman in the next one when we meet Allagash, possibly.
Oh, I'm very excited about trolls and mines and immemorial cities.
Yeah, I feel like too, maybe I am being a little harsh because there was so much intensity in the last episode that they feel this one just kind of felt like a break a little bit. There wasn't. It started with a lot of action, and I guess it ended with a lot of action. In the middle, there was that fight between Jade and Scorpio, I guess. But other than that, really not much action at all. So yeah, this was kind of their. Maybe they're just taking things easy, and then the last 3 episodes, it's going to kick up again, and it's all going to be, a glorious conclusion.
Like I said at the start, this was the character comedy driven episode, and I was absolutely okay with that. Chris, may I give you this week's meager lore update?
Please do. Is this one a quiz too?
You know what? We're going to make it a quiz. I'm going to read a list of all of the new concepts that were introduced in this episode, of which there were much less than previous episodes.
My notes were lighter too, one of which, general, so I might not be as prepared as I was last week.
Well, for the people playing at home, one of these is a lie. The rest of them are actually concepts in Willow World. Dag, the Great Tree, the Wildwood, the Ghoulies, Skellen, dread mines of, the Deep Root, Corrosian Death Dealers, Slaves, and Truth Plums.
I'll give a moment for the audience to think of their answer. And I believe Deep Root is the fake.
Yeah, you caught me.
All right.
You caught me. I've decided that I'm never going to trick you, so I'm just going to assume that I've tricked a plurality of the audience, and feel good about myself.
At least 7%, which would mean one person. I don't know how many listeners we have.
Chris, do you have any predictions for the next 3 episodes?
I think I've stated my main one so far. I do predict it will get a little more actiony, a lot more actiony.
Okay.
I think we're gonna see Eric in episode 7, not episode 6. I think we're gonna see Allagash in episode 6. I think he's gonna be a major part of that episode, and maybe only that episode. I just made that up. I don't know. But no, I don't really have any crazy off the wall theories.
Okay.
I'm sticking to the crazy ones of the past.
I don't necessarily know if this is a prediction so much as it is a hope, but I'm very captivated by the idea that these sort of fairy tale kingdoms that we haven't heard much about, that at least one of them had a slave trade at one point. And I do think that the writers are savvy enough that introducing that means that we are going to have at least some sort of a reckoning for the power structure in Willow World, because Sorsha, for as much as she is a protagonist of this story, seems to be pretty strongly implicated in a uncomfortable and not very heroic action of, slaughtering mothers and taking children to raise them with false pasts. So I really hope that bringing that up means that we are going to reckon with some of the past of Galladoorn.
Yeah, I wonder if they could eventually turn Sorsha into a villain.
I mean, that would be full circle.
Interesting. Cool. Well, I was wondering.
I would.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, what did you want to do?
I was just wondering if you've heard anything from your friend Warwick lately.
I will let you know after I do a little research on restraining orders and podcast recordings.
Not the answer I was expecting. Doesn't sound as... I thought you had his number and everything. Anyway.
You know what? Could we do some shout outs to some folk real quick?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to give a quick shout out to 2001 A Space Podyssey, who sent a very lovely tweet to us. Jonesing for deep dish Willow discussions at the level and quality of your favorite Star Wars or LOTR podcast. So were we, and we found Willow Talk. Funny, insightful, knowledgeable, fans of the original talk about each new episode. Check it out. That is awesome and so very, very sweet. 2001 A Space Odyssey. I haven't had a chance to listen to it because I just got this tweet. But they're a podcast dedicated to the history, science, and legacy of the all-time classic film. And we'll have their information in the show notes. But I don't know about you, but I'm an enormous fan of 2001. I showed it to my children recently, and I thought they would be mad and wouldn't want to see it, but they sat through the entire thing. And what I realized is that it unlocked an entire universe of cultural gags for them.
Sure.
Probably every week following our viewing of 2001, the kids would hear the opening strains of Thus Broke Zarathustra on some cartoon, and they would go, "Dad, I know what this is." And it sort of felt like magic to give my kids that cultural key.
I just saw something parodying the opening of it, and God, what was it? I can't remember. It was something new. It's probably something kiddish. I don't know.
That would be the Barbie trailer.
Yes, that's it. That's it.
Yeah, it is such a ubiquitous series, and not just that. There are so many things in that movie that are ubiquitous cultural images that I love. So I'm definitely going to give that podcast a listen. And thanks again, guys. Over on the iTunes store, we actually have a bunch of new reviews. So I'm going to read the two most recent. Chris, do you know what our average rating is on iTunes?
974.
No, it's sitting at a 4.9 out of 5, which if you asked me for the perfect score, I'd say 4.9 out of 5. Because if we had 5.0 out of 5, well, all of those are lies. Those are all reviews from our parents. Yeah. But a 4.9 out of 5, perfect. So real quick, this review is titled Magic Wand, and it is from Xander SR. It's rare that a podcast is immediately good, but Chris and Cameron have come out of the gates so impressively with a show that not only has structure, but is thoughtful and incisive and has a really refreshing optimism and openness about the new series. The theories and predictions are so wild, they're worth the price of admission. That's all on you, buddy. It's also very well recorded, and both seem very comfortable on mic, which adds to how listenable the podcast is. I've honestly found myself excited every week for each new episode to drop after I watch each new chapter of the show. The only downside is that the Willow TV show is only 8 episodes, so I hope they find a way to continue after the season finale, or maybe discuss Star Wars movies too. I think we have a couple episodes planned for things after, but I don't know. Maybe in the future we should do another podcast. I think I would like to do a silly podcast about Henry Cavill's Warhammer 40,000 show when that happens, but I've got a few years before that happens.
A lot more knowledge finally, on a certain universe than me too, probably. But
oh yeah, I actually want to have a Warhammer podcast where I explain Warhammer lore to somebody who is aggressively disinterested and tries to tell me that it's stupid, because I think that would be fun. So here's our final review. This is from Shipwhack. Definitely your go-to for Willow. These guys are knowledgeable about the lore in the industry, but don't get uptight about the details. Thank you. It feels like I'm sitting there having a beer with them while they discuss a subject they are passionate about. That's perfect. Yes.
I'm drinking subject we're passionate bubbly about, water right now, if you want to know what we're actually drinking over here.
Yeah, I've got a lovely dusty glass of tap water, but I will pretend it's a beer with you, Shipwhack. So thank you guys so much. And again, if you go over to Apple Podcasts, rate, review, and subscribe. Apparently that's how people find our podcast. But really, the real reason is I like to read nice things people say.
Oh, we had our first YouTube really comment as well.
Oh, would you please read that
as well? On YouTube, but it's better to listen. But anyway, Jez Hunt said, been really enjoying these lads. Vesta was the Roman goddess of the eternal flame, and the priestesses were famously the Vestal virgins. I'm guessing it's a dragon and maiden gag. I guess we said something about it.
Hey, nice. No, yeah, like a vermisax at a Vestal fair. So adding a little more context to it, that maybe that joke actually does land. Thanks.
Jez goes on to say, oh, and you can totally hand sew denim. Denim in our world was nearer to the time of castles, 600 years-ish, than the Greek helms of the movie over millennium. So complaints of anachronisms are kind of odd.
Yes. Team denim. I love it. I thank you to everybody who said nice things on Twitter or on the podcast apps or on YouTube. We thrive off this, and I'm very, very grateful that you guys are enjoying this, because I'm really enjoying doing it. So that's a lovely turn of events.
I'm just glad you don't think we suck.
Yeah, apparently not.
Maybe people do, and they just don't care enough to leave a. I want to make some enemies. What fun is it if you don't have like a nemesis? I can't destroy what the Force. That's true. That's been called off.
If you would like to be our nemesis podcast, please let us know. We are taking applications. Chris, can I take a stab at our classic outro?
Please.
Are you ready?
Yeah, like stab it 1,000,000 times if you need to. Kill it.
Okay, no, wait, I actually forgot. Ignore the bird. Follow the river. Unless the bird's going the right way, in which case follow